Ladies and gentlemen, the title of this meeting is grim enough: Strategies for Survival in an Age of Division and Extinction. As the introduction states, young Koreans are no longer interested in getting married or having children. Coupled with the continued concentration of people into cities, this trend is driving an alarming population decline and rural depopulation that may very well push the country to the brink of crisis. The retreat from marriage and consequent low fertility, implying population decline and aging, affects all the countries of the developed world. Of the low fertility countries, the leaders are the East Asian countries of China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, and above all, Korea. If Korea can manage this problem successfully, then any country can, and the rest of the world will be set an example. If not, then Korea will be in the vanguard of those populations who are declining and in a Gadarene descent into oblivion. The usual indicator of fertility is total fertility. It's just the number of children a woman would have if current rates of childbearing by age continued. It is highly volatile. It can go up as well as down. So don't let it worry you too much. The support ratio is the number of people of conventional working age for every person of nominal pension age. It is defined purely by demography. Korean fertility has fallen to 0.72, the lowest in the world. It already has one of the oldest populations and is poised to descend into a population decline. What happens if these trends continue? Business as usual brings severe population decline and serious population aging. A simple projection shows that the support ratio falls from about 4 to less than 1 by the end of the century and remains there henceforth. By 2061, population age 65 and over outnumbers the working age population. Population falls from 31 million to 18 million by the 2080s and continues to fall. Official projections, though, assuming some recovery in fertility, are more optimistic. But all populations, don't forget, are always wrong, just a question of how wrong. This cannot continue forever. The most dismal official graph ever was published some years ago by the Japanese National Institute for Social Security and Population Research. It shows the fate of the Japanese population with unchanged vital rates and little migration. The last Japanese turns out the lights in 83,000. But Korea is not to be outdone, beating Japan by a short head to become extinct by 2750. The first nation in the world to extinguish itself by not troubling to reproduce. Now, these graphs are extreme. I don't believe this will happen. But such nightmares are a useful reminder of the urgency of the task. What then is to be done? If domestic supply fails, consumers turn to imports, including imports of people. Public opinion has not welcomed the idea of migration in this closely defined, complex, ancient, homogeneous culture of East Asia, fearing the disruption of that revered culture. Korea lacks the ethnic divisions which come from migration. Instead, gender divisions are becoming important, termed gender wars by the media. But attitudes are changing. In Korea in 2022, 9% of marriages were multicultural and 6% of births. The words used to describe children of mixed origin, too, have become more civil. East Asia has been reluctant to accept large-scale immigration. But what would happen to the purely demographic consequences if it did? Let's suppose that Korea manages to attract 1 million immigrants every year. What would the population then look like? Population increases from 51 million today to 73 million by 2080 and rising. The support ratio, now 4.5, ends up at 3.2 and will remain constant with constant birth rates. Low, but not catastrophic. These figures could be manageable, but population will rise indefinitely, and the population of Korean origin will decline indefinitely, from 94% today to about 30% by the end of the century, and falling. That assumes the population of mixed origin remains low. If the aim were to maintain the recent support ratio, then quite silly numbers of migrants will be needed, increasing all the time. This simple projection shows population rising to 375 million by 2081, at a constant inflow of 7.5 million immigrants per year. The support ratio is indeed restored to 4.6, but only briefly, and even more immigrants are then needed to preserve it. And the population of Korean origin, down to 5%, will be close to disappearing. So immigration can stop population decline and moderate population aging. But it can only solve population aging with constantly increasing migration and population size. It evades addressing the social pathologies behind low fertility, and integration is a problem. After all, is it easy to learn to be Korean? And how would Koreans react to their country's culture being changed? For the level of migration would have to be very great. Any population with sub-replacement fertility which maintains its size or age structure through migration will eventually be completely migrant-descended. Of course, it is wise to adapt as far as possible to the adverse consequences of demography now built into the age structure. We must also address the fertility and the marriage issue. For the longer-term future, even though children born now will not enter the workforce for another 20 years. First, we need to ask, why are these East Asian birth rates so low? The basic problem is surely this. The very rapid economic change since the 1970s has not been matched by social change, giving Korea a modern economy with venerable attitudes, especially towards marriage, the family, and relations between the sexes, which now threaten its existence. As Lyman Stone observed, the Korean government successfully achieved some of the fastest economic growth in human history, but the price has been that there hasn't been a next generation to inherit it, and has successfully discouraged non-marital fertility, but also very successfully discouraged marriage itself. That really matters, as 94% of births in Korea are within marriage. In a modern society, the persistence of these cherished issues has adverse consequences. These mostly affect women and make marriage unattractive. A traditional male breadwinner arrangement worked well in the past when men were breadwinners. There were few opportunities for education for anyone, so there was no opportunity cost in having children. Now society has changed. In the public realm, women in Korea are the best educated in the world, with opportunities for advance in employment, but paid 31% less. In the private realm of the family, these opportunities are constrained if some men take little interest in domestic duties, childcare, if they work long hours, socializing with colleagues rather than returning home. These habits are changing, but still some remain. Women need to impose strict portion control on family size if they have both a real and a domestic job to do. Small surprise that 1 in 3 unmarried women report being indifferent to the prospects of marriage. Inequality also limits substantial potential spouses for well-educated women and for poorly educated men, making marriage impossible for them. 78% of the fall in births from 2019 and 22 is caused by the decline of marriage. Some men still expect women to give up their career upon marriage to become housewives, denouncing women who demur as feminists. These obstacles are part of patriarchal and moral familism, a widespread social attitude in East Asia and Southern Europe. Familism emphasizes the primacy of duties and rights within the family and with relatives at the expense of non-family relationships and responsibilities to strangers. It does not encourage interpersonal trust and engagement in wider civic society. It tends to lead to a low level of state involvement in family support. In the modern world, familism is the enemy of the larger family. When women were limited to the domestic realm, there was no impediment to larger family size. As women mostly dealt with domestic tasks in the past, so some are expected to do so now, despite women's new responsibilities and opportunities, with little help from men until recently. Hence, downward pressure on marriage and low fertility. Fortunately, these expectations are changing. in time with the Korean imperative for success, with work culture seems extreme, often called workism. Average working hours, 38% higher than the OECD average, are the third longest in the OECD. Employment is often insecure, undermining confidence in families about the future. This is also the highest in the OECD. That depresses fertility. In corporate life, there are obligations after work. Other factors make marriage unattractive. Severe competitive pressure for the best schools and universities, and thus the best jobs, creates an extreme education culture. Examination fever is a burden on parents, mostly on wives, who must arrange for their children to attend extra cram school costing up to $2,000 per month. Real success means working in Seoul, where expensive housing is too cramped for more than the smallest family. Fertility in Seoul, home to half the population, is 0.55. In the rest of the developed world, women can do it their way. Marriage has lost its imperative for many, no longer necessary for respectable parenthood. In some countries, one half of births are to unmarried couples, mostly in consensual relationships. In the developed world, there is no country which has a reasonable birth rate which does not also have at least 30% of births outside marriage. That is not a recommendation, nor my preference, or a recipe. Nonetheless, it is just a fact. Extramarital fertility sits uncomfortably with the respect for the family and ancestry in Korea. These take away from the total fertility of some higher fertility countries, and the total fertility will be no higher than that of Korea. But Korean women cannot do it their way. It isn't their way because cohabitation is not normal. It is still deemed culturally unacceptable, stigmatized by reputation and by bureaucratic complications, although my students tell me that it is now more common than supposed. Apparently, 76% of respondents agree with this statement, that if two people share a house and livelihood, they can be considered as a family, even without marriage or bloodline. And in 2023, a bill was introduced to the National Assembly to liberalize this policy. So things are changing. But there's still very few births outside marriage in Korea. A Nippon Foundation survey found that most women in China, Korea and Japan thought it was difficult to bring up children, the opposite of opinion in the Nordic countries, France and the US. Babies are not treated equally. Birth registration and childcare discriminates against children born outside marriage. But surely, Korea needs all the babies it can get. What to do about the statistics, the obstacles to marriage and higher fertility? Money is important, and the budget has been hugely increased, but it's still below the OECD average. Recent policy threatening to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, attempting to raise working age even beyond its very high level, seems to me to be very interesting, shall we say. I believe that culture is paramount, but difficult and painful to change. Can we learn something from comparisons with countries with higher fertility, such as France, the Nordic countries, and the Anglosphere? These countries had slow economic growth over a long time span for the 19th century, in parallel with gradual demographic change. Fertility was already quite low by the late 19th century. Social arrangements had time to adjust. Working hours were moderated by legislation over a century by trades union and moral pressures. Large-scale immigration, ethnic diversity later became general, although widely opposed then and now. Social change accelerated since the 1950s, the so-called second demographic transition, late marriage, widespread cohabitation, half of births outside marriage, and so on. Gender equality slowly improved, encouraged by legislation from the 1960s as men were pressed to help more in the home. Other pro-natalist population policy was much discussed before the war, but did not endure, except in France. Yes, total fertility fell in the 1970s as women entered the workforce and into higher education. there was natural, reasonable postponement of births. But fertility recuperated in the 1980s onwards. Family-friendly labour market reforms and culture change helped women combine work and children. Expectations on men grew powerful. France had the only comprehensive population pronatalist policy since 1939. No one else did. Birth rates go up as well as down, as in post-Soviet Eastern Europe. In England and Wales, it was 1.8 in 1938, 2.9 in 1981, fell to 1.6 in 1977, recovered to 1.9, fell down again, recovered again to 1.9, and now has fallen to 1.4. Nothing to do with policy. In July of this year in Korea, marriages increased by 33% and births by over 1%. The latest official projection expects fertility to rise to 1.1. In 2018, the average ideal number of children among married women in Korea was 2.2. So there is hope for progress in the future. But there is now a worrying recent trend. Higher fertility in Scandinavia and the near Europe is falling. An uneven decline. France is still quite less affected. But this decline is a rational response to crises, which may be temporary. The enduring economic crises of 2008, COVID, the Ukraine war, and widespread job insecurity. There's a more serious possibility, though. There may be long-term culture change taking place with relationships and children no longer a priority throughout the Western world. The hikikomori syndrome is an alarming development, and the 4 Ds as well. Demographers are still puzzled. What to do? Korea faces 3 choices, all unpalatable. 1, do nothing and hope for the best. Things may improve by themselves. 2, go against Korean history and preference and encourage immigration, probably inevitable in the short run. 3, at the same time, promote by law and nudging changes to make marriage more attractive. That means encouraging further changes in male behavior and assumptions, reduce working hours below the present level. Longer working hours, it's now believed, are counterproductive, not helping productivity or output. These things improve with a shorter working week. Important also to restore secure employment as far as possible. This is known to be linked with higher fertility. Grant more powers to trade unions. Recruit, pay, and promote women equally with men. Update the family law to support families irrespective of family type. That would mean controversial legislation or quotas, very un-Korean. But enduring, surprising culture change has followed from legislation and from nudging, creating new norms. Successful examples include rectifying the former distorted sex ratio in Korea, reducing road deaths in France by enforcing speed limits, making drink driving unacceptable in the UK and banning smoking in public places, and picking up dog mess. All thought to be impossible to enforce, all done. In conclusion, trying to answer the question, salvation through migration, not salvation, but some will be needed. A question of culture, really, patriarchy, marriage, workism, education fever. If Korean women now behave more like men, to nurture marriage and children, Korean men need to behave more like women. If it is to save itself, Korea must cease to be so traditionally Korean and accept some highly unacceptable changes contrary to traditional values. Otherwise, the future of East Asian fertility may just be going to the dogs.